This is something quite different from what we usually do on the channel. So we have Chris here.
So I'm Chris, and I was previously an Indonesian citizen. I grew up in Singapore for 8 years, and I studied there from primary 5 to JC2. In a way, I did the IB programs. I was spending 6 years in ACS Independent. What brought me to London since is that, first of all, I studied in UCL, completing the bachelor's for Stats and Econs. And after studying there for 3 years, I've been in London ever since to work. Firstly as an auditor, and then I started working as a financial due diligence analyst, and subsequently strategy consultant.
Which primary school do you go to?
I was in Bukit Timah Primary School.
Bukit Timah Primary School?
Primary 5 to primary 6.
And which area do you stay around?
I was in Bukit Panjang, Cashew Road specifically. Now we are quite lucky to have the MRT station, right?
Yes, downtown lines. Do you enjoy your time at ACSI? Because I have many friends from that school actually.
So the experience was great overall. At the start it was difficult because English was never my native language. It was tough adjusting from the Indonesian education system to Singapore education system, which is why I had to drop 2 years when I came to Singapore to first of all study English and ensure that I was fully prepped for PSLE, which is really a determinant to which secondary school you'll be able to go to. Therefore, it was a challenge at the start, but I really enjoyed Singapore. Studying in Singapore opened up my eyes to the world, and I'm really grateful for the education system in Singapore, which is excellent and I think highly commended even among the people here in the UK.
What is your most fond memory of Singapore?
Yeah, I think what I really remember was spending my time with my brothers. When we were younger, we were separated in a way that my 2 brothers went to Singapore earlier than myself, and I think living in Singapore connected us together, and it was something that I enjoyed. And certainly I enjoy the people, the sense of humor that Singaporeans have, and I really enjoy how efficient Singapore is as a city and as a country. The Singapore government has thought ahead and planned out the future way in advance, and that's something I'm really grateful for. And not to mention the food as well. I really like Singaporean food.
Agreed.
And that's something that I miss even to this day as well.
What is one thing that you found difficult adjusting? Maybe in your first few months in Singapore, you're like, oh, what is this?
Yeah, I think it's the rigorous education system. In a way, I would say that the Indonesian education system is slightly more relaxed than the Singaporean one. So I think adjusting to the rigor itself was difficult, especially prepping for the PSLE exam at the time, for which I only had 2 years to prep. And another thing was the English education system, which is different from Bahasa, which is the medium language for us back in Indonesia.
Fast forward a few years to IB days. At which point do you decide, oh, I want to come to UCL in London to do my university?
At that time, the draw for the UK was the relatively affordable education system, coupled with the fact that it was 3 years long. That attracted me to come to London. And also I find the British culture somewhat similar to Asian culture in a way that I think the British people are more reserved generally than, say, the Americans.
I'm quite surprised you said you came to the UK because of like the relatively affordable education system, because back then the pound was maybe 3 to 1 Singapore dollar.
No, it was 2 to 1.
2 to 1 already?
Yes.
Okay.
3 to 1 was maybe around 2005.
So 2 to 1 actually is still, I wouldn't say it's cheap, right? Because compared to Singapore, like university is going to be a lot more expensive.
Yeah, it was. Just wanted a change of environment at that time, and
fair enough.
I mean, it was still somewhat relatively affordable. I think given the price of education back then, I think the tuition fee has more than doubled in the time that I've spent in the UK from 2011, back when I was in undergrad, to today. I think the fee is completely different.
Then moving from Singapore to London, what is the biggest culture shock to you?
We take so many things for granted in Singapore, like the transport system, the hawker food that we often enjoy, and I think the people as well, certainly friends and family, having them around. These are the things that we often take for granted before moving to a new country, and I find that was maybe a shock to adjust to a completely different environment where I didn't have any family members around me, and I had to make friends with the new uni mates. And I find that was actually the most interesting perspective meeting people from all around the world in London.
Mm.
I think it's a melting pot for people around the world.
I totally agree with Chris on this, Only after coming to London I realized Singapore is actually quite affordable. Not in terms of like maybe housing and cars are still expensive.
Yes.
But when it comes to day-to-day expenses, food, transport, public transport is a big one, right?
Yes.
Like the MRT system in Singapore, I would say is more efficient and like way cheaper, right? Over here, a tube ride costs you like £3 at least. Yeah, and I really like how you say London is like a melting pot of culture. And I think in Singapore, we are also like a melting pot of culture, but more, for Southeast Asia. Whereas here, you get more like a European and, the Western world's melting pot.
Yes.
Do you, in the near future, 5 to 10 years, foresee Singapore catching up to London in this aspect, or you think that London will always have an edge when it comes to the diversity of people?
Yeah, I think Singapore is definitely catching up. Singapore has an excellent reputation in the UK, actually, and that's something that even British friends and colleagues have acknowledged, that Singapore is quite efficient and Singapore is doing well in the relative term in the world. So there's always an attraction for people to move to Singapore. And in fact, over time, whenever I visited Singapore, I find that the diversity is increasing continually because of its excellent reputation. And I'm not too sure if it will ever catch up with London in terms of its diversity, but certainly it's moving in the right direction.
Can you just share how has your education in, ACSI and then in UCL prepared you for your career?
Yeah, so what I do for a living now is strategic consulting. What we do is to give strategic advice on businesses around their growth strategy, around their profit and loss, and how they can improve their performance. And how has the education system shaped me for that is in terms of the strategic thinking. I think Singapore really prepares me well in terms of mathematics, in the way that it trains me to be an analytical person, and that's something that's necessary for strategic consulting. And the education system has really geared me towards framing problem in a structured and really systematic manner that has put me in good state in a strategic consulting firm.
What is some advice? I'm sure some of our viewers here are thinking about moving to London for university, for work. What are some advice that you would give them in terms of how can they prepare themselves for the move? What are some things to take note of before coming?
So definitely come with an open mind and come with the spirit of wanting to learn more about the country, about other cultures, and make sure that you spend the time that you have in London with other people as well, not just Singaporeans, because doing so will enrich you as a person and will ensure that if you decide to go back to Singapore, that you come back as a richer person. And I think that's something that I'm grateful to have done in the past when I was studying here. I made sure that during my time in here, whether be it in the campus or in the halls, that I mix not only with Singaporeans or people of our cultures, but also people from different cultures.
You spent many years in London already. Yeah, I think you consider this your second, if not even your first home. What are your plans into the future?
I'm a British citizen now.
Yes.
So I've roots here in this country, and I hope to settle here and to hopefully be able to get into politics in a way, whether be it at the local level or maybe at the national level, and help to make a difference, help to bring out the voice of East Asians and people who might feel underrepresented at the moment, and to give back to the UK, which has, I think, been a privilege for me to have settled here.
That's nice to hear, and congratulations on your new citizenship.
Thank you.
How was the process like? Was it difficult getting a British citizenship, and what are some challenges you face as like a brand new, newly minted citizen?
Yeah, so I think the process starts with securing a job here, which is paramount to getting the indefinite leave to remain status. One can qualify for the ILR after working here for 5 years and ensuring that there is no gap of 180 days in any given year. So once you have got the ILR and you have lived here for a further year, I think the path is it's quite straightforward to get citizenship as long as you pass the citizenship test and knowledge in the UK test.
I'm just curious, what are some questions that they ask you in that test?
Yeah, they ask about the UK culture, about the kings and queens, and sometimes one of the king that really struck me was Henry VIII again. with his so many wives
Yes.
as well. I think that was one of the questions that struck me, and they really test the knowledge around famous and influential UK figures like Sebastian Coe. So it's really quite key to get a grip with knowledge around UK culture and UK history. There's a book in which you can actually practice the questions, and typically the questions will come from the question bank. As long as you practice them and you learn by heart about some of the key facts of the UK, you should be able to pass.
I see. This reminds me of the driving theory test. By any chance, you know what is like the national dish of the UK?
That's a tricky one because different parts of the UK have their own dish. For instance, the Scottish are quite well known for haggis.
Okay.
For instance.
I tried that one, I didn't quite like it.
Yeah, I think it's a niche taste. I mean, I personally like it, but I think it's not to everyone's taste. Some say that fish and chips is a national dish.
Personally, which one is your favorite?
I quite like fish and chips. That's a personal favorite of mine.
Yes.
Yeah, chicken tikka masala.
And this is just a fun fact. I think fish and chips in the UK is commonly served with mushy peas.
Mushy peas.
Right, which are green peas cooked until they are very soft. I think a lot of Singaporeans, especially the younger ones, will really be frightened by this. How do you like it yourself?
I quite like it.
Having been here for so many years, maybe just share what is one thing you miss about, being in Indonesia or like being in Singapore that you don't feel like you can get it in the UK.
Yeah, I think the food, definitely. I highly rate Singaporean food and in fact Indonesian food. I miss that, and certainly friends and family. It's been a little bit tough to reconnect with them sometimes during COVID, especially when travel plans were hindered and we had lockdowns here in the UK even. So I think that's something that in the post-COVID era that I'm looking to reconnect as well and to resurrect the friendships and the relationships that we have in the pre-COVID days.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing so much about your life in the UK and your experiences back in Indonesia and Singapore. It was nice having you on this episode, and let us know if this is something that you're interested in watching more of, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.